The best way to talk about how there's too many sequels in the gaming industry is by making a sequel to my last video. In my previous video, I mentioned how 3 of IGN's top 100 games of all time were Super Nintendo sequels. 2 of these, Zelda: A Link to the Past and Super Metroid, came from series which started on the NES, but those original titles didn't make the cut on either top 100 list. I had started to script out some thoughts on how so many modern games are built on the shoulders of giants, improving and iterating on decades of gameplay innovations to become instant classics. But the more I looked at these lists, the more I realized that many weren't just built on the shoulders of giants, they were part of the family. I started with the 2000s onward, where I counted 49 entries in IGN's top 100 that were either direct sequels or otherwise new entries in an existing franchise. However, as I went through that portion of the list, I started to notice more and more sequels in the 90s section, and even in the tiny 80s section. 18 of the 23 games from the 90s were sequels, as were 3 of the 5 from the 80s. All said and done, 70 of IGN's top 100 games of all time were entries in established franchises, with an additional 5 that I classified as spin-offs. For example, Bloodborne may not have been a direct sequel to anything, but it had plenty of overlap with established Souls mechanics, as well as being developed by FromSoft, so in my opinion it still carried more weight on release than other new IP. GQ's top 100 fared somewhat better. 15 games from the 80s and 90s, and 43 from the 2000s onward were from existing franchises for a total of 58. I counted a total of 5 spin-offs on this list as well, bringing the total to 63. So GQ's list had 12 more original titles than IGN's list. With how staggering those statistics were, I had little choice but to look back at the lists from the Game Awards and Golden Joystick Awards as well. Out of 62 total nominees for Game of the Year, the Game Awards nominated 39 sequels and 6 spin-offs for a total of 45, or 72.6% of the total nominees. As for the 11 winners, 7 were sequels and 2 were spin-offs, making up 81.8%. For the 153 games nominated for Ultimate Game of the Year at the Golden Joystick Awards since 2014, 90 were sequels, with an additional 7 counted as spin-offs, making up 63.4% of the total nominees. In that regard, they tend to nominate more original titles than the Game Awards, but then again, they also nominate 2 or 3 times more games in general, so take that with a grain of salt. As for the winners, 8 out of 11 were sequels, with an additional 1 counted as a spin-off, for an identical 81.8% overall. The Critics' Choice winners included 6 sequels and 1 spin-off out of 10 total winners for a total of 70%. In my last video, I called the overlap between recency and nostalgia an intersection. I still think that's fitting, but now I think of it like an intersection where 4 fire trucks have all arrived at the same time. Who goes first? How do I even begin to digest those numbers in a way that makes any rational sense? As with most questions in life, the answer lies in Zelda. The number 1 game for both IGN and GQ was Breath of the Wild, which also won Game of the Year at both the Game Awards and the Golden Joystick Awards. It carries with it that debate about recency, since it only released about 4 or 6 years prior to those top 100 lists being published. It's also impossible to disconnect it from nostalgia, being the 19th entry in a 31-year-old franchise. Would it still have been number 1 if every bit of the franchise DNA had been traded for an original IP, while the core gameplay experience remained the same? The Last of Us and Tetris took the number 2 and 3 spot for GQ, which were both original titles, while it took until the number 10 spot on IGN's list, Disco Elysium, before one could find a completely original IP. Despite generally being regarded as improving upon Breath of the Wild in nearly every way, Tears of the Kingdom lost many potential awards to yet another sequel, Baldur's Gate 3. The chasm I fell into with this research truly makes me believe that, while the numbers don't point to an issue of recency bias, we certainly need to carefully consider the clear skew towards sequels or otherwise established IP over original IP. Morbid curiosity got the best of me, so I decided to look at one last set of data to test this new line of thinking: the Game Awards nominees for Best Independent Game. Of the 55 total nominees, only 1 was a sequel, Spelunky 2 in 2020. Other nominees, such as Ori and the Blind Forest, Monument Valley, and Axiom Verge, have had sequels, but none were nominated for Best Indie. The argument could be made that since indie studios don't have as many resources at their disposal, they simply aren't able to churn out sequels at the same frequency as larger studios. But while the Best Independent Game category has consisted of 98% original titles, The nominees lean far more into potential recency bias than their AAA counterparts. 16 were released in Q1, 12 in Q2, 23 in Q3, and 4 in Q4. When looking at halves instead of quarters, the nominees are neck and neck, with 28 in the first half and 27 in the second, but those Q3 releases made up a full 41.8% of all the nominations, as well as 6 of the 11 wins. 2020 and 2021 were particularly egregious, with all 5 nominees from 2020 releasing in Q3, and only 1 nominee from 2021 releasing in the first half of the year. This again may be due to when independent developers and publishers tend to release their games to maximize their chances of success. For example, 7 of the 17 Q4 nominees for Game of the Year were console exclusives, with 7 of the remaining 10 being high-profile sequels. Compare that to only 4 Best Independent Game nominees. It could very well be that midsummer to early fall releases work best for indies in order to avoid coinciding with those huge AAA releases. All this brings me to ask the question, what really drives our adoration for the games we play? In any given year, the numbers simply don't support the idea of recency bias for naming Game of the Year. When looking at top games of all time, more modern games overwhelmingly dominate the discussion. But as I mentioned previously, gaming as a medium has grown and evolved exponentially over the past 40 plus years, along with the technology we use to enjoy them. After all, if you tried to rank the 100 best TVs of all time, a black and white CRT from the 1940s would get an honorable mention, maybe, while number 1 spot will probably be some 90-inch flat panel OLED from last year. The real specter looming over the industry and its top accolades is nostalgia. Even if you chose to ignore what I call spin-offs, sequels or new titles in existing franchises have totaled 62.9% of Game of the Year nominees at the Game Awards and 63.6% of its winners. And before you criticize the industry folks who make up the jury for the Game Awards, remember that fans voted for the Golden Joystick Award's highest honor to go to a sequel or a new entry 72.7% of the time. What is it about existing franchises that makes it so difficult for us to break away from them in favor of something new? Perhaps the existence of a sequel already implies a level of adoration along with the financial success that made the sequel possible to begin with. And with that success comes the opportunity to build upon what came before and make improvements. When done correctly, the love for the franchise only grows, eventually leading it to win untold accolades and claim the number 1 spot on 2 separate top 100 games of all time lists. Or, because some of these franchises have been around for decades, any new property that comes along gets compared to one or several existing franchises, leading us to compare something brand new to something with deep roots. Would these same franchises flourish in the same way now, or would they be left out to die because of their obscurity? I don't have answers to these questions. I merely have a slightly alarming amount of data that I'm not even being paid to comb through, and an earnest curiosity when it comes to the question of recency bias. But when entire studios are closed and games are yanked from storefronts because they don't meet some lofty expectation from shareholders, I believe this aversion to brand new ideas is just as much a reaction to industry trends as it is the cause of them. It may be a cliche, but one of our only tools as consumers is to vote with our wallets. No matter what type of media, the best way to get more original stories is to show your support for the ones that do get made. Thank you so much for coming along on this data-filled journey with me. I know these videos have been a lot different than my usual stuff, so I really do appreciate the support. And with what we've learned about these industry trends around sequels and whether or not recency bias exists, I mean my sign-off now more than ever. Play what you love, and love what you play.